What is up, y'all? Welcome back to another Fish the Moment live stream. Tonight, I'm going to share one of my crazy bass fishing theories with you that hopefully isn't that crazy. Now, I want to run it by Randy as well, and we're going to discuss my new theory on how you guys can find bass more consistently on your home lake any time of the year, any season of the year, regardless of the conditions. I think I'm kind of onto something here. I want to share it with you guys first, and I'm probably going to develop it more, maybe make a full YouTube video about it later. But I want to just kind of go back and forth with Randy, discuss it, and see how everything's going. So anyways, Randy, how are you doing tonight?
Doing good, Johnny. That's something we all need to know about is how to find bass more consistently. Because man, it's bass fishing. It seems like there are some days that it just seems like it's so easy, and other days it's just impossible. So if anyone can figure out how to catch them every day out there, I'm all ears too.
For sure. Well, that's the whole goal for everyone in bass fishing is trying to catch them every day we go out. So hopefully we can shed a little bit more light on that. So before we get into all that, though, a couple things. First, wanted to say hi to everyone who's on the live stream here, the live chat. We got Ryan, Darren, Dustin, Joe, John, bunch of other guys on here. Good to see everyone. And one thing, there was a pretty funny comment over here from Jacob. He says, I would have done so much better in school if I enjoyed class like this. So glad you guys enjoyed the live streams. I know we get pretty in the weeds, pretty specific, detailed about bass fishing, but that's what we like to do here. So hopefully you guys are enjoying that content. So before we kind of jump into the main topic, I wanted to pose a question to you, Randy, that I think is going to be kind of interesting for the audience to hear about. Over the last couple of weeks, I've been thinking about all of these old baits that were really popular in the 1980s, 1970s that were just amazing. People were catching fish on them like crazy, and all of a sudden they just kind of died off. They aren't as productive as they used to be, or guys just aren't throwing them anymore. We kind of saw that a couple of years ago with the resurgence of the spinnerbait. After everyone started throwing the chatterbait, it was like chatterbait mania for a long time. Then the spinnerbait kind of came back, and it never really necessarily went away. Some guys were throwing it, but it wasn't like the number one tool in the tackle box. Now the spinnerbait's kind of making a return. Is there a bait, Randy, that you feel like is going to be making a return? Maybe you can look into the future and give guys here on the live stream a look into what the next big thing is going to be based on what you used to fish maybe 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, thing about baits, Johnny, is like, true innovation as far as on a new lure category or completely something that nobody's ever done before is extremely rare. I mean, I bet 95% of the baits that we fish with today are basically a modification of an existing idea. So from that standpoint, it's hard to come up with something new. But in my opinion, the thing that I sort of see fall into that category is pork frogs. Pork frogs have been around for a long time. Back when I started out in the 70s and early 80s, that's all we had as trailers. There was a lot of different varieties of styles. You had the eels, you had strips, you had different type of frogs, and that's what everybody used. And they remained super productive even up until when Uncle Josh quit making them, about when was it, 15 years ago or something like that. So in my opinion, there's been nobody that has come in and picked up the ball to not only reinstate the popularity of the pork frog, but to improve it. Because the thing that I see out there just waiting to happen is if you have a company that can develop a pork frog that has consistency a lot more than Uncle Josh did. Uncle Josh, the consistency was terrible on there. I'd get one good pork frog out of every 2 or 3 jars, and the rest of them, they'd either be too thick, or the legs would be crooked a little bit, or there'd be too much fat on one part, not enough on another. And even though Uncle Josh's came out with the new frog, I bought some of them, and it's the same thing. The consistency's not there. It looks like a 6th grade kid cut them out of a piece of pork with a pair of scissors. So nobody has really mastered the consistency on this pork frog. So I see a huge comeback if somebody can figure out how to do that and how to come up with some better colors. That is something that could have a huge resurgence, because I know for my own fishing, I mean, there's always going to be a place for plastic. My super chunks and my big salty chunks, I'm always going to be using them. but there's some situations where nothing can produce as well as pork. Absolutely.
For sure. There's a couple guys saying they love the pork, and there's other guys saying the Berkeley Mac scent is kind of like the new pork, where you got that Mac scent. And I think part of that pork, the appeal of it is the consistency, or the kind of like the texture. When those bass bite it, they hold on to it. I used to fish a lot of pork actually up in Wisconsin when I was living up there. I was really close to the Uncle Josh plant, and I would go fishing with actually the guys who worked at Uncle Josh, and they would go out, and they had all kinds of crazy ways that we would keep the pork from drying out. You would put them in the live well, or you'd stick them over the side of the boat, or whatever it was, and they worked great. It was just such a pain to keep it fresh, keep it good.
I didn't mind it, and it's something that you just sort of have to deal with that. But like I said, it was just a mainstay for me. I mean, I was so heartbroken when they quit making it, because what happened is I used to keep them in Tupperware containers. I'd never keep them in the jars because they got too crunched up.
Yep.
So what I would do is I would take a Tupperware container, maybe 12 inches long. I'd fill it up with the brine, and I'd put like 50 frogs in it. So of different colors. And what happened is, after about a year or two after they quit making those frogs, they got ruined. It's like they got super hard, and they started curling up, and they lost everything about them. But I'll say one thing about pork frogs. It's like, you see a lot of these companies, you're talking about Berkeley or whatever, they're trying to duplicate it. I don't think that there's any substitute for just the pork. There's something about just the natural pig fat pork that it just really appeals to the bass, especially the bigger fish. And so I'm looking forward to a comeback on that.
For sure. That's pretty cool. Yeah, one thing that's really interesting to me on the pork situation is, are we going to see resurgence in tournament bass fishing with all the top anglers there? That's one thing to me that I'm really interested to see, and I think there's a big potential there for that. Especially if you get some more winter tournaments. Have you found success a lot with Randy with pork in the summer and the spring, like during the spawn, or is it more cold weather situations?
I've done just as good in 90-degree water with it as I have in 45 or 50-degree water with it. Back when I used to fish the old Redmans, which were the BFLs now, I fished the Okie division and the Ozark division. So I fished all the lakes in Oklahoma, all the lakes in Missouri, and I did great in the tournaments down there, fishing all those Oklahoma lakes, flipping a half-ounce jig with the #1 pork frog, middle of the summer. I won my first BFL tournament at Lake Texoma, flipping that big jig, 90-degree water temperature. So, it works in the summertime just as good. There was one comment here. Eric was saying we need a Japanese company to oversee pork frog production. That is so true, because they are such perfectionists. They could definitely get it right. Yeah, the ones you see, like the ones you're pulling up here, Johnny, the pictures from Uncle Josh, they don't look like that, guys. That is like some type of highly edited photo, because when you get them out of the jar, they don't look like that.
It's kind of like those McDonald's advertising marketing things. The cheese is perfect and it's laying great, and then when you get it out, it's like, oh, it's just a burger.
It's the same.
It's awesome. Well, for my pick, Randy, the lure, obviously I kind of have more of the offshore spin. I think of lure that we're going to see making a big comeback here. I don't know why. I'm predicting this. It may not be like now. It may be in a year or so. It's the old classic single tail grub. Sorry, I was trying to add some suspense there as I pulled it up. Single tail grub, just like a smoke purple grub. I used to just absolutely hammer them, back in Wisconsin on smallmouth, on offshore rock piles, things like that. And this is before you really had a lot of the high-tech swim baits, before you had the spark shads from Megabass. There wasn't a great 3 or 4 inch swim bait out there that worked really well on a jig head, and that's when you went to a grub. And I know some of you guys probably still throw grubs, but I think there's so many fish that are getting conditioned to that swim bait profile, whether it's the Kitech with the ribbed swim bait or like a spark shad. I really think that this just old-fashioned like Yamamoto grub, whether it's a 4 or a 5 inch grub, put that on a spinning rod and fire that around, especially for largemouth, I think it could be a big deal. And I know that Brent Ayler actually won a tournament on Table Rock Lake in like 2008 fishing a grub over the top of standing timber, and he blew that tournament away just swimming a grub. And I'm sure now that guys might be doing the same thing with swim baits, but I don't know. I'm going to start experimenting with the grub a little bit more and see if we can maybe make a resurgence of that, because obviously if you're going behind other guys who are all throwing a Kitech, maybe the Spark Shad or something that has a different profile could get you a few extra bites, but I'm thinking even you could get more bites if you're throwing something very unique like the grub.
Yeah, the old Klons Grub, at one time, this was even probably before you were around, Johnny, the Klons, it had the notoriety of like the Kitech does now. It's like everyone started using the Klon Grub, because what happened is during the 80s, most of the 80s, all the grubs that you had were like real basic colors. They were like solid white, solid chartreuse, not a lot of variations. But Klon came out with the salty grub, and they started making more translucent, shaddy type finishes. And that totally opened up a new world of grub fishing. And this was back in the early 90s for the most part. Yep. And then you gradually saw a transition to more high-tech swim baits. But I'll tell you a real quick story. My first experience with the grub fishing, that I saw how productive it was. I was fishing a Bassmaster there's a top 100 tournament on Lake Pickwick. This had to be like back in 1990, like right around 1990. And I drew this local dude out there that lived on Pickwick. This dude was like 75 years old when I drew him. Everybody told me he was the best fisherman on the lake. He was my co-angler. He absolutely wore me out on just a white grub that he dipped a tail chartreuse in it. And he won the tournament on the co-angler side. He had 4 that weighed like 21 pounds with me the first day, and he jumped off a 7-pounder. And so I saw how effective the grubs can be on that day at Pickwick for sure.
That's awesome. I'm going to bring the grub back, Randy. If I make it big, then we might even try to come up with like a new and improved offshore grub or something like that. I'll come up with a design.
I will say this. I just remembered this. I almost won the Bassmaster. In fact, I would have won the Bassmaster Classic in 1998 on a grub if I hadn't lost the 6-pounder on a grub. I just remembered that. The second day of the tournament, High Rock Lake, the one that Denny won, I finished third in that tournament, in that classic. And I was using a Lucky Strike bluegill colored 5-inch greedy grub, they called it, Texas rigged, pitched it up against this laydown log, hooked a 6-pounder on it, got it right to the boat, and it came off.
So shallow water grub fishing too. Yeah, okay, Randy.
That was one of my big keys back in the 90s, is flipping that 5-inch grub around shallow cover. Gary Klein is the one that actually got me keyed in on that, and it was a killer deal in dirty water. I mean, water visibility on High Rock in that tournament where I was fishing was only, I don't know, maybe at the most 12 inches of visibility, 8 to 12 inches. So yeah, they'll bite it in dirty water.
Man, we need to do a grub-only challenge, Randy, on Table Rock or something. You can do it up shallow. I can go offshore with the grub. That'd be a good video.
Yeah.
Yeah, good deal. Awesome. So let's jump into one more thing before we do that. Gotta call out the winner of last week's Bridgeford giveaway. Every single week on the Fish Moment live stream, we give away a case of Bridgeford beef jerky. And basically, you get 12 packages of Bridgeford beef jerky. Great snacks for the lake. They're just so addicting, Randy. I've been doing a lot of CrossFit workout recently, and I've been trying to get all of my macronutrients down, trying to get myself healthy eating. And Bridgeford, it has some sodium in it, but other than that, it has really good protein. I need a lot of protein for what I'm doing, and so it's great for me. I usually just have one package of it while I'm on the lake, and it's a really nice snack. The salt is good when you're sweating in the summer here in Arkansas, and it's like 95 degrees. Get some water retention. So I've been loving it. My wife, she eats so many of these packages when we're on the lake. I don't want to throw her under the bus, but she loves the stuff. So it's really good, and everyone over in the comments saying that they love the Bridgeford beef jerky. Everyone who gets the cases, they love it. So that is awesome. And last week we had a question of what your favorite crankbait is in the fall. And one crankbait that I only heard in one comment is a crankbait that I've actually caught a lot of fish on over the years. And it's it was one of my first baits that I really started to throw. So it's kind of a personal choice for me. But it's from Trey Flores. And he said that his favorite fall smallmouth crankbait is the Lure Jensen Hot Lip. Do you remember that one, Randy?
The hot lips this season?
Yeah, the Hot Lips.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
Lure Jensen. So that is a great little bait. And, Trey, congratulations for winning a case of Bridgeford beef jerky. If you're listening to this now, or if you listen to it afterwards, after the live stream posted, just send me an email at info@fishthemoment.com. We'll have Bridgeford send you a case of Bridgeford beef jerky. So huge shout out to them for sponsoring the podcast. Our only title sponsor, so definitely support them at Walmart, Academy Sports, wherever you guys can find some Bridgeford. Pick it up and give it a try. Awesome. So we'll talk a little bit more in a few minutes about which question we're going to ask for this week's giveaway, but I don't want to delay this topic any further. The main topic for tonight, guys, is how do you go and find fish more consistently on a lake? And one thing I've been doing, Randy, recently is I've been doing these Catch 15 challenges, where I basically go out and try to catch 15 pounds of bass with no practice, no help. I just go to a lake and just fish. And catching 15 pounds is hard enough, but also just catching a limit of fish is hard. So I kind of have to, when I go to these challenges, have two different mindsets. I need to be going after big fish, but also after numbers of fish. I don't know where the fish are. I don't know what's going on. When I get to the lake, I usually don't go to the same lake maybe every 3 or 4 months. So it's not like I'm going to the same lake every single month. I might not go there for 3 or 4 months. The fish are completely different. So that's kind of how I'm treating these challenges. And one thing I've realized with these challenges, and I actually just did one on Kerr Lake, which is a part of the Arkansas River. You guys are going to see some of my prep videos for this over the next couple days. But basically, I was on this pool or lake off the Arkansas River, and it was really shallow, really muddy. Now, I'm not going to ruin what happened in this video because I want you guys to see it and check it out on the main Fish the Moment channel. But basically, I struggled on this lake for the first half of the day because I was trying to target individual fish. My main strategy that I started on was trying to go into some shallow water willow grass, some shallow vegetation, fishing a swim jig, fishing a few other baits, maybe cranking some riprap, stuff like that. And I was not getting the number of bites I was needing to put a limit of fish in the boat. I could get some good bites, but I wasn't catching the numbers. So what I decided to do halfway through the day is abandon that strategy and go after areas where I thought I could find schools of fish. And it turned out that the challenge went better than expected, and so you guys can check out the video to see the full results. But that's what's happened in all these Catch 15 challenges recently, Randy, is that I've been going after schools of fish. Now, right now I'm going after offshore schools of fish, but I've also been targeting some shallower areas where there's schools of fish up shallow. Now, I'll explain a little bit what I mean by shallow areas where you can find schools of fish, but I just want to get your opinion first, Randy, as a shallow water angler. Do you find that it is, in a tournament scenario, easier to maybe catch a limit if you target the schools of fish, or have you found more success just in your fishing targeting the isolated, individual kind of roaming fish?
It's went both ways for me on Johnny like that. A lot of it, obviously depends on time of the year, type of lake that you're fishing, that type of stuff.
Yeah.
But for me, first of all, you have to sort of determine, are you out to catch a limit just to get a limit in the boat, or are you out to catch your 5 biggest fish that you can possibly catch?
Yep.
So most of the time in my situation, I'm going to be initially targeting shallow water fish. I mean, when I'm talking shallow, I don't mean like up on the bank. When I'm talking shallow water, I could be on a flat 200 yards off the bank, fishing isolated grass or stumps or something like that. But generally, we're talking about fishing less than 10 feet deep.
Yeah.
So for me, what I'm trying to do with that, there's 2 different schools of thought on the shallow water that I'm trying to focus in on. The first one I'm trying to do is locate an area that has enough cover in that area where I can hit a lot of that cover and catch a limit. And the second one is to try to develop some type of a junk fishing pattern. If I can key in on some type of a junk fishing pattern, whether it be isolated boat docks, or it could be, a certain type of a point that has a certain type of angle, or it could be going to the back of the coves and, looking for bluegill beds or isolated laydowns, whatever like that. For me, most of the time, my limits are focused more on that shallow water. And I feel that for me, it's easier to catch a limit of fish out of the shallow water than it is offshore, because I know what to look for more. It's, I don't spend the time graphing for more. And it's a lot quicker for me to locate those fish than it would be offshore.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that for you, Randy, with 30 years of experience, it clicks for you, that pattern development, and on a lot of these lakes you go to what patterns work on those given fishing days. And I want to kind of pull up a Google Earth of Grand Lake, because it's just, again, we use Grand Lake a lot, but it's a lake that has a lot of different variety to it, so that's why I like to use it. And I know, like, let's say, Randy, that if we were going to go fishing in the spring, let's say, on Grand Lake, I know your strategy most likely is you're going to go into some of these shallower, flatter pockets and try to determine which banks, whether it's the chunk rock banks, the flatter pea gravel banks, maybe where in these pockets, like on the secondary points or whatever it is, and you're going to just kind of fish through these pockets and try to develop a pattern that you can run across a bunch of different pockets. You can run one pocket to the next pocket to the next pocket, covering lots of water and kind of patterning those fish. But you may have to cover 8 to 10 different pockets, 20 different pockets to maybe find those fish. And you also have to be very particular at which key stretches down these banks you're going to be fishing, because just based on fishing with you and kind of knowing your style, you're usually fishing for spots where you might get one bite down this bank, maybe 2 bites at the most. You're normally not going to go down like a bank like this and get 12 bites. Would you agree with that?
Exactly. I mean, that's what you're having to. That's the difference between how you approach finding fish and me, Johnny, because I'm thinking in terms of one fish at a time, and I'm thinking in terms of if I catch 5 to 8 fish a day, that's going to be a good day for me. Where you may pull up to a spot and you may catch 20 off of one spot without moving the boat. So it requires a mentality shift a little bit. I mean, the way that you and I mentally approach the water to catch a limit of fish is completely different. I mean, I realize that I've got to work at it. I mean, not that you're not working at it. Your work is a different type of work than my work. My work is covering a lot of water. It's making a lot of casts. It's breaking down shallow cover. Your work is more studying, the structure, putting your boat in the position where you feel that those fish are grouped up at. So it's a completely different approach.
Yep.
So when I'm thinking in terms of breaking down a lake and figuring out how to catch a limit of fish, there's a couple of different considerations here. I'm trying to figure out what is my goal that I'm looking for. Am I trying to catch a limit of fish to stay up in the points and make the championship at the end of the year? Am I just wanting to catch a quality limit of fish and try to get a check? Or maybe have I stumbled on something that's producing the size of the fish that has potential to win that tournament? So there's a lot of different considerations to make. I will say this about, locating the fish and figuring out like that. It's very rare that you get on some type of a shallow water deal where you feel that you got a chance to win a tournament. And when you get on that, you have got to exploit that to the fullest, even if it's slow. I mean, even if you're not getting a lot of bites, because if you don't spend all your time looking for that certain grade of fish, then you're never going to win the tournament, because you're going to be in great water half the time, and then the rest of your time is going to be in water that takes you away from that potential to do so.
For sure. And I think one thing really important to call out from Randy's perspective, I think, is you're always focused on tournament bass fishing. And when you go tournament fishing, you usually have 3 to 4 days of practice for an event. Would you agree with that when you go to the lake? So you have 3 or 4 days to figure out what the fish are doing. In my Catch 15 challenges, I have 0 days. I'm just going out and just fishing day of. And I think that's the common experience for most of the people on the stream. They don't have 12 days or 4 days or 5 days to learn these lakes. They have Saturday, and then Sunday they have to spend time with the family, and then Monday they're at work. And I think that your approach to fishing, Randy, works great if you have extra time to fish. And that's what I found when I was on Kerr Lake the other day, is I was trying to develop a shallow water pattern. I spent 4 hours trying to determine a shallow water isolated pattern, whether that was swimming a jig in the grass, fishing the back of creeks with laydowns, whatever it was. And I was running lily pads, I was running laydowns, I was running these things where I felt like I could get these isolated fish and develop a pattern. But when you only have 8 hours to fish, you have to eliminate so many options when you're on the lake in those shallow isolated areas that it's going to take you a while to determine, okay, are the fish in the backs of the creeks? Are they on the main lake? Are they on wood? Are they on rock? What's the right presentation? Do I need to throw a crankbait or a spinnerbait or a worm? What do I need to do? And with all those options, I feel like it really it puts the average fisherman at a big disadvantage. And even with the practice you have, your 3 to 4 days of fishing in practice, you're still saying that you want to go get 5 to 8 bites a day. So for an average fisherman with no practice and no idea where the fish are, they have to spend half their day finding the fish or more, and then if they really dial it in, maybe they only have 3 or 4 hours of fish. That leaves them about 2 to 3 hours to get a couple of bites. And I just don't think that that's a realistic approach for an average angler. So what I've been finding in these Catch 15 videos is that I've been focused on areas where I feel like schools of fish are setting up. Now, I know that when people think about schools of fish, like if we're on Grand Lake, for example, they're thinking I'm talking about offshore fishing. And yes, offshore fishing is a great way to find schools of fish. And when I'm fishing offshore, the key places I'm always looking for, and I talk about this in so many of my videos, if you watch the main Fish of the Moment channel, I'm always looking for places where you have a creek channel or deeper water hugging up against shallower water. Whether that's in the back of a creek, we need to pull up Navionics here, just give me a second, guys. Whether that's in the back of a creek, whether that's on the main lake, any place where you can find a creek channel or deeper water close to shallower water, a lot of times that's going to group up fish on offshore structure. And it could be in the back of a creek, like back in here, where you have this sharp drop off to this flat. But that depth change, especially on these man-made lakes down south, lowland, highland reservoirs, that's where you find your groups of fish offshore. But that's not the only place you can find groups of fish by a long shot, and there are shallow water options for catching groups of fish. And if I look back at a lot of my success in fishing in general, I find that I have a lot more success when I target areas that have a potential to hold many fish. One example of that might be this bridge over here on Horse Creek. I know that Brian Latimer in a March tournament, he finished in the top 10 in a FLW tour event just fishing this one bridge in this riprap the entire event. You've seen that with Hank Cherry at Lake Gunnersville. You've seen that with Randy Howell also at Lake Gunnersville. If your lake has these bridges, you can literally just go crank this riprap back and forth all day because this riprap is at a key pinch point in this creek. You have the rest of the back of this creek here where these fish can spawn. You have the main lake where a lot of fish will set up during the summer months. And this bridge is that pinch point between the two. In addition, you have a same combination of shallow to deep water. There's a deep creek channel here in 40 feet that then comes up close into shallower water up in, let's say, 2-3 feet of water here. So you have deep water close to shallow water, and you can catch a ton of fish around bridges and find a concentration of fish. Another place you could potentially find a concentration of fish, and you could find them consistently, is around public boat ramps. If we kind of steal from Matt Pangrak over at Bass Talk Live, take one of his concepts of the BMR squared. Bridges, marina, riprap, and ramps. Basically what he's talking about is places where you can go and just always catch a fish. Bridges are a place, because again, they're kind of choke points between areas. You have marinas where you have big docks that stick out in the water, a lot of habitat, a lot of shad and stuff will set up here, bluegill, some marinas. Riprap, which a lot of times can be on the bridges, that holds a lot of heat, brings in a lot of food for the bait fish. And then finally, your boat ramps. Major boat ramps a lot of times have a lot of tournaments out of them, and there's released fish in those areas. And because all of those released fish get set out there, there's a lot of fish in the area. And what I've realized with my Catch 15 challenges is that if I can focus on areas that I feel like are going to have schools of fish, I've been able to catch a limit in every single Catch 15 challenge I've done so far, and all the challenges I've done against you, Randy, when I've focused on this approach of thinking about finding schools of fish, not finding isolated individual fish, just running down the bank and randomly skipping boat docks or, trying to pattern, shallow laydown patterns. I've made the conscious effort to locate areas where I feel like hundreds, or maybe not hundreds, maybe 50 fish will set up so I can catch 5 of those fish. And it doesn't matter if it's shallow or offshore. There are offshore areas that hold schools of fish, and there are shallow water areas that hold schools of fish. But I think that making that distinction and finding it could be the key for a lot of these newer anglers to have more consistent success. Maybe not catching the biggest fish in the lake, maybe not going out and catching 15 pounds every single day, but if you can find, for example, one of those areas that holds schools of fish, you might be able to go run the riprap, run the bridges, run the marinas, and catch a limit. And that's a lot better than just, for a lot of guys, just randomly fishing down the bank and not catching anything. What are your thoughts on all that?
Totally agree with that, Johnny, completely. One of the things that, I mean, you made a comment that, I'm focused on tournament fishing, which is true. But I don't, if I'm out to just find fish like we're talking about here with the guys, I don't fish like that unless I'm in a tournament. I don't, when I'm shifting into that tournament mentality, when I'm focused on trying to catch my 5 biggest ones, if I'm just out for a weekend of fishing, I don't like to fish like that because it's not near enjoyable. I just want to do whatever I can do to get bit. I mean, I just enjoy catching fish. I don't care if they're 10 inches long or 10 pounds. I mean, obviously it's better to catch a big one, but I just want to put myself around the areas that I can get the most bites with a lot of different techniques. What you're talking about there about the R whatever squared, the hard structure like that the fish on, that sort of goes back to my approach as well on this on shallow water, because the biggest advice I can give guys to find fish quickly and to take the intimidation factor away from lakes, particularly larger lakes, you got to put this lake in segments to make it mentally less overwhelming to you. So on any man-made lake that you go to, or even any natural body water, I could take the Potomac River or whatever, there's going to be major and minor creek arms in those particular lakes. If you go into any particular creek arm on any lake around the country, there's going to be a big population of bass living in that creek all year long as the water's deep enough. So first thing that I do if I'm looking, to find my fish quickly is I'll immediately pick out a couple of the major creeks, and I'll sectionalize those particular creeks into the first third, the second third, and the last third of the creek. And depending upon the time of year that I'm fishing, and depending upon the water temperature and what the water clarity is, I will decide what part of that creek that I feel is going to be the highest percentage. And then I go into that part of the creek and I break down everything in there. Say, for example, like right now, if I go to the back third of a creek, like right now, I'd be looking for the most stained water I can find. I'd be mixing it up between fishing the steeper banks, the flatter banks, whatever cover's available. It could be isolated wood, it could be docks, it could be rock transitions. I'd break all that apart, and then after I broke all those structures apart, I would try to figure out what the mood of the bass was. And when I'm talking about the personality and the mood of the bass and being able to locate and catch these fish quickly, you have to determine if a bass is in a chasing mood or in a non-chasing mood. And so normally you're talking about, are you going to be fishing a crankbait, chatterbait, spinnerbait, or are you going to be fishing a shaky head, jig, creature bait, that type of stuff. Once you identify the mood and the personality of the bass, and then you get a feel for what portion of the creek that fish is in and what type of bank they're in, that is when you can really locate those fish quick, and you can catch big numbers of fish, almost any time of the year.
For sure, and that's how I break down the lakes offshore as well, as breaking those creeks up into thirds. And I've made several videos about that too, guys, if you want more info on that whole concept on the Main Fish the Moment channel. Breaking up lakes into segments, into sections, is super critical into breaking down lakes quickly. And then I guess that is a great way to break down the water. I think still the goal of this live stream that I'm trying to get at is the difference between fishing for the individual fish versus the schools of fish for the average angler. So breaking down the lake into the creeks, the sections, is super, super valuable. And then once you break that creek down, I think it's very important that if you don't have a lot of time to actually go out and fish, you only have 1 time or 2 times a month where you can go, I think it's really important to put yourself in areas where large concentrations of fish are going to set up, and then that way you can start dialing in your presentations, whether you need to throw a finesse bait, a moving bait, things like that. So if we kind of take a look at this creek where we were talking about with Randy, and I was kind of highlighting the map while he was talking, we pull this up, this is just Honey Creek here on Grand Lake. Areas for me that would be high percentage areas for fish to set up in this creek would be, for example, if I think the fish are in the middle third of this creek, kind of in the middle section. Well, obviously this bridge here is going to be a great place where these fish are going to set up and be in a group. You're going to have a kind of pinch point here, the riprap, deeper water. So I'll be spending quite a bit of time setting up around this bridge. Another area would be this marina boat dock. You have deeper water underneath the boat docks with a lot of shade. Shad and bluegill will set up around these areas as well. And then finally, if I was going to take a look at the middle of this creek, I would also be looking for areas on my navionics where I feel like I could maybe find some offshore groups of fish. So if I had to go into here in the middle third of this creek, maybe some of these shallow drop-offs here that drop off from 5 feet into 30 feet of water, this ledge right here. This could be a great place where you have that sharp drop-off, deeper water close to shallower water that could hold a lot of fish. Another area might be off this shallow point that sticks out here. It's in the mouth of a little pocket, deep water on all sides, and this is a great feeding table for those bass. This is kind of the approach that I would say might be a little more effective for if you have less time to fish, because you're giving yourself a chance to get into an area that you can catch 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fish on one spot. Where with Randy's shallow water approach, Randy might just kind of pull into the back of this creek and check a bunch of different banks, the flat banks, the shallow banks, things like that. But it still might take you maybe 3-4 hours to really get dialed in on what the fish are doing. Would you agree with that, Randy?
Yeah, at times it can, but I've got a question I'll pose to you, Johnny, because I'm sort of like, I'm really unsure in my own mind about this. I'll use an example of last week. I had an on-the-water lesson down at Table Rock Lake and pulled up on this one section of just a long rocky bank that was probably, I don't know, maybe a couple hundred yards long, pretty long section. And we caught a bunch of bass all the way through that bank, just cranking rocky banks with crankbaits. A lot of the fish were the same size along this particular bank. Now, we think in terms of school fish versus individual fish, as school fish being grouped up in like a school and individual fish setting up on targets. Now, my question I'll pose to you is like, say we caught 30 bass on this 200-yard stretch of rocky bank with crankbaits. Is that a school of fish on that bank, or are those fish just setting up individually on whatever rock cover is there? I'm not sure.
I would consider that the school of fish. An example I can say on that I've seen in the past is, for example, on Beaver Lake, very similar situation where you have that. I had a point over here that was just absolutely loaded up, or one rocky bank that was loaded up with fish. I need to get this navionics to load. It's kind of going slow on me. But basically, I was fishing this one rocky bank, and it's basically an area where, losing my bearings because this thing is loading really slow. So here it is. So you have a nice rocky bank right here where this main creek channel swings up against it, and it's on the main lake. Creek channel swings up against it, and what I feel like is happening is that those fish are using that creek channel as a migration route back into a different area. You could pick another area. Maybe you pick this rocky bank where you have a creek channel that swings up against this bank. I feel like a lot of times those fish are using the creek channels as a migration route, and then they're stopping off on different banks to feed. And what you can find is that if you can figure out the right section of the creek, then you determine, okay, I feel like there's a creek channel that's tighter to this bank. There's nice rock cover there. The wind's blowing on it. Potentially those fish might move out of that creek channel, out of the highway, onto that rocky bank to feed. And now you have a school of fish that has moved up in there. And that's very different from going and just finding like an isolated fish that's swimming around in the back of a creek feeding on bluegill. They're on bluegill beds. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. It sort of makes me wonder if these schools of bass, like the ones that I was catching on that bank in there, I'm wondering if the transition or the migration of those bass, did those bass all swim up the lake from the main lake and decide to filter back in that creek, because it was sort of in the back of the creek where I was catching them.
Yeah.
And did they all swim from the main lake back in there and then start dispersing in the back of that creek? Because when I went out to the main body of the lake and tried to duplicate the bank angles, I didn't catch any fish. So I guess maybe bass can just, like I said, they've got this collective consciousness that they swim in there together and just sort of stake out their own little territories. Because I think that's the big misconception. It's like most people, when they think about bass schooling up, they're thinking about you're making the same cast every time and you're catching a bass every single cast. and they're schooled up. So
Yeah, I guess
that,
that's my definition. I didn't give a good definition of schooled of bass. For my definition of a school, I don't necessarily think that you have to be catching them on one like spot the size of the front deck of your boat, for example. For me, if you find around like a bridge here or riprap, if there's a 200-yard stretch of riprap where you're catching fish consistently down the entire thing, that to me is also a school of bass. There's a group of bass that's set up there. There's 100 bass or 200 bass down that stretch of riprap versus going down to this one boat dock and you catch one 3-pounder off this boat dock and you never catch another fish there for 3 days. And there's maybe you catch one fish off this boat dock, one fish off another, and you catch a couple. There's like a little wolf pack of bass, maybe 5-10 bass that have set up here, but you can't just go down this whole bank and catch 15 fish. And I've seen with my fishing, especially with all the electronic stuff I do, I find schools of fish year-round every lake I've ever been to. Like, it doesn't matter if it's the middle of the summer, the middle of the winter. There are always areas where I find that you can get on a school of bass. And it's an area, in my mind, a school of bass is any place where maybe you have a 100-yard stretch up to an area that's the size of the front deck of your boat. So a really small area or a bigger area where you can go back and forth down that area and catch fish over and over and over and over again in that area. It's not just like a catch a fish and that area is done. Does that make sense?
yeah, absolutely. And a lot of it too, I think that I'm really fascinated by the fact that fish school in different sizes a lot of times, and it's almost like it's interesting because I've seen this evolve over the years about how, and this is off the topic just a little bit, but sort of related to it. It's like I've seen how the size of bass in schools have gradually went down over the years. I remember reading back in there was just one bass fishing magazine that I found in 1975, and they had a picture of these guys on there that caught a 10 bass limit out of Lake Toho, right there below the lock in Lake Toho that weighed 137 pounds, 10 fish limit. They had these bass on a stringer holding them. Every one of them were, 10 to 12 pounders on there. And the guys were saying that they caught them like one cast after another schooled up. So 50 years ago, you had schools of 10 pounders, but now it seems like these schools are like 1 to 2 pounders or something like that. And you don't see the big giant schools like back in the David Fritz days, even on like the TBA lakes of the big schools. So I'm sort of curious how that's sort of unfolded a little bit.
I completely agree because it's funny. I've been out on Table Rock Lake 3 or 4 times in the summer over the last couple of years. I've never caught a fish out of a school on Table Rock Lake over 3 pounds, ever. And I fish a lot of their areas on Table Rock Lake, caught a lot of good fish out there. All of the big fish I've caught on Table Rock or Beaver Lake or a lot of these lakes where I find these schools of fish, they're in areas where I get 1 to 2 bites. Like maybe there's a wolf pack of 5 to 7 bass. I think those big bass offshore are now breaking up out of those schools and they're getting more isolated. And that's where I found all my big fish for these Catch 15 challenges I've been doing. If you look at my challenges, Grand Lake, I had my first challenge. I caught a 6-pounder out of one brush pile. It was an isolated brush pile, caught a 6-pounder. All the rest of the fish I caught were between 2 and 3 pounds in a school. The next trip went to Beaver Lake in Arkansas. I caught a bunch of fish out of a school between 1 and 2 pounds. Maybe biggest fish was like a 3-pounder out of one school. The one fish that I caught over 5 pounds was an isolated small little school of like 3 or 4 fish, and I caught one 5-pounder out of it, and that's it. And I think that there's a difference in kind of the idea of catching schools of fish to get numbers versus those bigger fish. That's kind of a different question of catching bass consistently and catching big fish is such a different mental shift where like if you want to go catch numbers and catch all that 2 and 3 pounders and just start catching fish, go after those schools of fish, those areas where big numbers of fish will group together. But if you want to go after big fish, Randy, your style of fishing up shallow, fishing isolated, lay down, stuff like that, that might be a better way to get a 4 or 5 pound bite for like a tournament. And also, if I'm going to fish offshore and I want to get a big bite, I usually start looking for small schools of fish, like 3 to 5 fish in a school, or fish like isolated brush piles, which is basically like fishing a shallow laydown at the end of the day, but offshore.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing. I think when you locate a school of bass offshore the way that you fish, Johnny, it's like a lot of times, I mean, you can you're catching a certain grade of fish. And if you say, for example, if we were down at Grand and you found a school of bass offshore and you were catching two to 2 3/4 pounders, it's going to be pretty rare to catch like a 7 pounder off of that same school, mixed in with those.
Yep.
But if you are fishing shallow water, I mean, I may be throwing a crankbait down a rocky bank and catching 1.5 and 2 pounders. And then all of a sudden I get to, there's a lay down tree that got blown over. I pitch a jig in there and I catch a 7 pounder. It's like the odds of that happening are a lot better on those shallow schools like that.
For sure. And I mean, there are obviously exceptions too. Like I've had spots, Randy, where I've pulled up and in 5 casts I've caught 25 pounds. And there's times where I pull up on one brush pile and catch 3 6-pounders out of one brush pile. So there are exceptions to it, but I would say I haven't done that since like 2013, 2014. Like in the last 3 or 4 years, I've maybe done that 1 or 2 times. I think it's just fishing pressure is really hurting those fish. I don't think those big fish school up in as big of groups now just because people can find them. And they're if these giant schools of bass group up with these big bass, it doesn't take long for someone to graph over them, find them, and start catching them. I think these fish have just got smart to it. And they're like, okay, I now need to roam in wolf packs of 6 or 7 fish to stay under the radar from the fishermen.
Yeah, I've got another observation here as far as schooling fish goes. And you guys in the audience, you may comment on this too. I'll be curious. If you guys go back and look at like some of the old Bassmaster photographs, like when bass first started back in the late 60s and early 70s, take a look at some of those bass that are on the stringers that they're holding. A bass 50 years ago and 50 and 60 years ago, they look different than they look now. I mean, I'm serious. I thought it was just me at first, but you go back to all the old photos and these bass 50 and 60 years ago, the proportion of the fish is completely different. It's like they've got big pot bellies that are sort of distended and distorted a little bit. And you look at bass now, the past 5 or 10 years in the same photos, same size class fish, I'm talking about 5 to 8 pound class fish. The way that the fish looks as far as their body structures are completely different. And I'm talking about schools back then too. I'm really curious to know what the deal is with that.
I think one thing that you're seeing in there, I really think, is that those bigger fish, to avoid fishing pressure, they're using, I think a lot of those big fish, especially offshore, this is more offshore, I think a lot of those big bass are acting more like striper than like largemouth bass. A lot of the big largemouth, like I remember I was on lake, the small little power plant lake this winter. I went around and I caught like 15 fish over 4 pounds in one fishing day. But what I was doing is literally going around the middle of the lake with my live scope, throwing a 6-inch swim bait, and just seeing groups of fish feeding on big schools of gizzard shad. And I was following these fish for like hundreds of yards to catch them. And I think those fish, they become pelagic in the sense that they will move with the bait fish, and they aren't just setting up on like a hard structure spot as much as they used to. Now, some of those bass, those loners, might get on a brush pile, and I think a lot of those fish you catch out of a brush pile, they're feeding on the bluegill, stuff like that. They have that body structure of those fish from like, 30, 40 years ago, but the average fish offshore is now longer, skinnier. They're not as just fat and healthy, and I think it's just because those fish have become more almost like striper, more roaming than they used to be.
The thing that I've really noticed is if you guys go back and if you can find any pictures of bass from Florida like 50 to 60 years ago, talking about pictures of bass like in the 60s particularly, all the bass down there in Florida, they were super black and they had giant stomachs on them, like just huge stomachs. And if you look at the bass now in Florida you catch, most of them have giant heads and little skinny bodies. It's like they're just complete. It's like they're different species almost, sort of. So.
For sure. The one thing, we got a comment here from Billy, says that he disagrees with what I'm saying unless there's no easier prey. So I think that's kind of a good point, is if those bass can find something like a crawfish or something, it's easy, they'll go eat it. But I do feel like still that fishing pressure, I think those fish are getting used to the fishing pressure, and they will move and shift their behavior. I think a lot of those fish are just getting out and just roaming more. And they're trying to find ways to feed while still trying to avoid fishing pressure. So they have to eat while avoiding the fishermen. I think that's, I mean, again, it's all theory. We have no idea. We don't know what's in the bass's head, but that's at least a theory. And I could be completely wrong. Randy could be. We have no idea, but it's always good to speculate. That's one thing.
Yeah, I was thinking about today because I always think about bass as far as what they're doing and everything, and I was thinking about how it's like what is the capacity of a bass's memory as far as is it short term, is it long term? What makes them not make mistakes over again? Then what makes some bass make mistakes over and over again? I mean, are they like people that some of them are just brighter than others? I mean, I don't know if we're ever going to know what that is. It's just speculation, but the only thing that we can really go on with that is reproducible results from our fishing. That we can learn some of that stuff about bass behavior and their personalities by observing how they bite and when we catch them and we don't catch them. But I don't know if we're never going to figure it all out for sure. I don't think anyone wants to figure it out either. It's just like that take a lot of fun out of it.
Oh, for sure. The chase and the hunt is always more fun. So I got one more thing I want to talk to you about here, Randy, which is you're going to love, which is live scope. So if you want to hear Randy rant about live scope, hold on for about 4 minutes. But one thing I want to take care of real quick is I want to make sure we let you guys know how you can win a free case of Bridgeford beef jerky. 12 packages of Bridgeford beef jerky. Bridgeford's our title sponsor for the live stream. Huge shout out to them. Check out the Bridgeford beef jerky at Walmart, Academy Sports, a lot of gas stations carry it. Great on-the-water snack. And if you guys want to have a chance this week to win a free case of Bridgeford beef jerky, then just go down in the comments of this video after the live stream is posted, or right now you can go down to the actual comments and let us know what topic you would like us to talk about in next week's live stream. I kind of want to get some feedback from you guys because I have a lot of these crazy theory videos that I like to talk about and things that are interesting to me and things are interesting to Randy as well, but we want to get your opinion on what you would like us to talk about, and any topics you guys have, whatever topic that we pick for next week, it's actually going to come from the comments, and whoever's topic we pick, that's the winner of the Bridgeford case, or the case of Bridgeford beef jerky. So just leave that comment of what you want us to talk about next week on the live stream, and you'll have a chance to win that case of jerky. And Trey Flores, if you're watching, Trey, you won the case of Bridgeford beef jerky this week for your comment about using the Lure Jensen hot lip crankbait. So congratulations to Trey, and just send us an email at info@fishthemoment.com and you'll be able to get a case of beef jerky shipped to you. So just send us your mailing address and we'll get it shipped out to you. One other thing really quick is that I want to let you guys know there are a couple things just wanted to call out over here on fishthemoment.com. One thing, guys, is that we have a bunch of lake breakdowns available on our website for the fall season. These lake breakdowns give you 40 GPS waypoints that you can transfer straight to your fish finder. And if we go down here, you can actually scroll down a little bit to the fall season, and Randy has a ton of fall breakdowns on lakes all across the country. And if you're getting into fall fishing and want some help finding out where to fish, definitely check out some of these breakdowns. They are really, really helpful. We got a lot of great feedback from them, and so definitely check those out. Again, waypoints to transfer straight to your fish finder, pretty good deal. Another thing too, guys, if you want to support Fish the Moment, a really great way to do it and a very easy way to do it is just head over to use our Tackle Warehouse link. Basically, all you have to do is go to fishthemoment.com, go to the Support FTM tab, use our Tackle Warehouse link. If you click that and check out on Tackle Warehouse after clicking the link, we get a small percentage of the profits. If you're buying tackle anyways, just do it through Tackle Warehouse using this link, and it helps support the channel with literally no other charge to you guys. And one thing you can even do is click on this link, guys, and then bookmark this page to your bookmark bar. And every time you go to Tackle Warehouse, you automatically use our link, and you don't have to worry about forgetting or going to the website every time. So just go to the website one time, click that link, and then bookmark the tab that opens up. Use that one, and you're good to go, and you're always supporting our content. So that is that right there. Okay. Back to Randy's favorite topic, the live scope. So, Randy, one thing that I have been trying to think about is if we're going to think about the schools of fish versus the individual fish, obviously finding those schools of fish is a great way for the average angler to catch more fish, because you get around numbers of fish, stuff like that. And I kind of explained why I feel like that's a good approach earlier in the stream. But then, like to your point, if those schools of fish only have 2 and 3 pound bass in them, that's not usually going to be enough to do well in a tournament. So I feel like what we're going to see a lot more on the Bassmaster Elite Series, and I don't think a lot of guys have made this jump yet. They haven't gone all out on this yet, but I think you're going to see more guys chasing isolated individual schools of fish with their live scope around these lakes. I think we saw last year there were a couple tournaments, one on Lake Fork that I feel like maybe was one with that live scope chasing those fish kind of around the standing timber and stuff like that. But I don't know if that was actually like fully, I don't know if it was like a full-on deal, but I'm thinking about guys who literally just graph during the fishing day, like I do in a lot of my challenges, are graphing in tournament for those moving schools of fish, using the live scope, targeting those fish, catching them, and then graphing again. I don't think I've seen that in anyone really doing that in tournaments. It's so high risk, high reward. But I think that at some point, tournament fishing might get to that point, and it might get to the point that's the way that tournaments get won. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that, first of all, fishing with you, Johnny, and talking, we've had conversations about live scope a lot. I think there's very few people that really know how to fully get the potential out of a live scope as far as to target those specific bass that you're talking about. Now, I'm talking about two different things. I'm talking about they don't know how to interpret it, they don't know how to set it up, and they don't know where to look for those quality fish at. Guys like yourself, and there's a handful of other guys they sort of figured that out. They sort of figured out not only how to interpret it, how to set it, but where to look for that type of stuff. So, I think there's going to be a minority of anglers that are able to do that. But I think for the most part, it's just like you said. I think that they're going to be, overall, they're going to get bit. They're going to catch a lot of fish, but it's not going to be a tournament winning strategy unless it's set up just perfect conditions, smallmouth conditions. When those fish are on offshore flats, when they're roaming out in open water, there's going to be certain scenarios that, those fish are simply going to be the winning type fish. But I don't think there's a lot of people that are willing to put the time and effort into learning exactly what that is. And there's not a lot of people out there that are willing to teach people how to do that. It's pretty secretive about it. So I think that it's so new, we don't really understand the effect that live scope is going to have on not only tournaments, but on the fisheries overall. Everybody knows my opinion on the thing. I'm against it for a lot of different reasons, but it's not going away. I think there's some tournaments that they're starting to have some no live scope tournaments. I've had a couple people have sent me some information on tournaments, like down in Texas, there are no live scope tournaments, just like no Alabama rig. So from that standpoint, that could be coming. But yeah, you're right. It's like for the most part, I think a lot of people they get enthralled in the novelty of it, and they don't really understand how to fully utilize it.
Well, and that's one thing that it's interesting because a lot of guys were seeing this, and I did that on the water live the other day, where I actually went out on the lake and found fish live. I hadn't been to that lake in 6 weeks or 6 months, so I basically just went out there cold. And one thing I got to comment on is guys were surprised at how much I used my 2D sonar, down imaging, and side imaging to actually find fish. And I talk about this in all my live scope videos, but I never find fish with live scope, ever. A lot of guys think that live scope is a tool to find fish. It is not. It is very difficult, I've found, to identify whether you're looking at bass or other species of fish using live scope technology consistently. I've found some ways to kind of get better at doing it. You can tell there's giveaways that you can kind of see, but I find that it's much easier to identify whether you're looking at bass, gar, crappie, something like that, using traditional 2D sonar, down imaging, and side imaging. Now, maybe that's just because I've been doing it for 12 years that way, and that's just kind of how I know how to do it. But basically, what I do when I go to the lake is I graph for those fish first. I see them on my live or my down imaging, side imaging. I see the fish. I say, okay, I think those are bass. I then go put the live scope in, and I validate, yes, they are bass based on what I see on the live scope and kind of how I see those fish biting. And then I try to get them to bite. And I only spend 10, 15 minutes trying to fish for those fish. If I don't get bit, I move on. And you watch me do that in the actual live stream. I did 2 hours of just me going and finding fish and actually caught the fish. But I think that that's one thing that a lot of guys mess up on with the live scope is they see it as this cure-all solution like the Alabama rig used to be. Well, there was a time when you could go throw the Alabama rig down the bank and catch them, yes. But it's not like every single angler in the entire country was catching 20 pounds of fish on the Alabama rig when that thing was in its prime. You still had to kind of know where to throw it, what to do. And I think that's the deal with the live scope that a lot of guys don't see is you have to graph a lot. Like I'm spending 4 to 5 hours of my fishing days every single trip driving my boat in a circle. Literally driving the boat. I'm not like fishing at all. The big engine, my 150 horsepower Mercury is on. And I'm driving my boat 4 to 5 hours a day to find the fish, to determine if they're bass. Then I stop on the spot, put the live scope in, and actually catch those fish. It's not a tool for me to find fish. And I did a whole video on this. It was like a whole analysis of why this is the case and all this stuff. What fish finders are useful. I did a whole study on it with like data and all that stuff. You can check it out on the main Fish the Moment channel. But that's what I think a lot of guys get caught up in is that they get a live scope, they just drop it in the lake, and they think that they're just going to be able to start catching bass immediately with it. If you don't know how to differentiate bass from crappie, from carp, from gar with the live scope, it's useless because all you're seeing are dots. Who knows what species they are? Well, the way I identify those fish is with my older technology, 2D sonar, side imaging, down imaging. Then I use the live scope to perfect my casting, watch how the bass are reacting to my bait, stuff like that. But I'm not using it to identify if I'm looking at bass or crappie or something like that. That's just, I've talked about it before, but that's really important.
You know, I'm hearing more and more about, just like Jacob Wheeler talking about the last tournament. It's more often than not, these tournaments are getting won with live scope to some extent, and everybody you hear them say the same thing. They say, well, what do you give credit to your win for? And most every one of them will say it's the live scope or forward facing technology. If I didn't have my live scope, I wouldn't have won this tournament. I have heard that over and over and over again. Specifically the last 6 months. My beef with the thing, and I'm going to go on just a little rant here. Okay, you hear Jacob Wheeler saying, yeah, if I wouldn't have had my live scope, I wouldn't have won this tournament. I want to say the same thing. It's like, let me get out of my boat and drag it over a sandbar, and then I can say, yeah, if I couldn't have got out of my boat to drag it over the sandbar, I wouldn't have won the tournament. It's, that's where my frustration with the whole live scope comes in, aside from the technology, is and I know we're off topic a little bit, but you wanted to hear a rant, here it is, and that's sort of where I'm coming from on that.
One thing I will say, guys, and this is very important to remember, and I think a lot of guys lose this as well, in business and things like that, a lot of guys who are saying that they're catching all their fish because of Active Target, Live Scope, Mega Live, whatever it is, they are getting paid by fish finder companies to tell you that. The guys on Major League Fishing, Bassmaster, they have an interest because those companies sponsor the events. And they want to sell more live scopes. They want to sell more fish finders. And that is a great way to market it. If their pro who wins the tournament says that the number one reason I won this tournament is because I use the Active Target, that's great. I can guarantee you Jacob Wheeler can catch plenty of offshore fish and offshore smallmouth without live scope. And if you took the live scope off his boat and took the live scope off of everyone's boat, he would still win that tournament. I am 100% positive he could find those fish without live scope and catch them. He may not have caught as many fish because the live scope could give him an advantage, but everyone else would also have the same lack of advantage and he would still catch those fish. I don't think that Jacob Wheeler would become worse without the live scope. He already was dominating pre-live scope already before he had it, or Active Target, whatever he's using. Jacob Wheeler knows how to find those fish and how to target them, how to get them to bite without live scope or with live scope. So you guys, or Active Target or whatever it is. So don't get caught up into the hype that you need live scope to catch fish. The reason these guys are catching fish is not because of live scope. It's because of their thousands of hours on the water learning how bass behave, how to find fish with their down imaging, side imaging, 2D sonar, how to get those fish to bite. A lot of the live scope and stuff like that is marketing, and it's I know guys, fishing finder companies don't want me saying this, but it's very, very, very true. You have to make sure you realize that. I've been to the point where I almost want to take mine off the boat and just go back to my regular old setup because guys don't believe that you can catch them without live scope. Randy, you know my old setup. until 1 year ago, I was with an old Humminbird Onyx 10 unit that was 7 years old and a 12-year-old Humminbird 998 on the front of the boat. And I was catching fish in challenges, and I was beating you in offshore versus shallow challenges with that old setup. And every single video you've seen from my channel that's more than 1 year old, every fish I've ever caught offshore has been with no live scope with old technology. The reason I caught those fish is because I understood how fish work offshore, how to use my technology, my old technology. Live scope has made it's made me more efficient, but it hasn't changed my success rate from 0 to 100. Put it that way.
Well, and that's one of the things that, and this here, everybody knows our dynamic is, you're the offshore electronics guy, I'm the shallow water guy. But one of the things that I've always been impressed about your approach to fishing, Jonny, is that you don't need that stuff to find those fish offshore. I mean, up until just 6 months ago, guys, you should have seen Jonny's setup on his boat. He had a 10-year-old, unit on his console. He had a little bitty unit up front, and he could still use that to find the fish. So, and I got a tremendous amount of respect for that. What I'm talking about is we go from Jonny's very modest setup that was extremely efficient for him into something now that, we saw some rigs last week at the tournament Lake Champlain, $20,000+ worth of electronics on the boat. So that's sort of the slope that, I've been railing against the whole time.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I'm finished. Go ahead.
Well, and there was a video that Jacob Wheeler just put out, and I haven't watched the video, so I need to go watch it. But guys are saying he's saying that there's only a few events that the live scope works on or that's helpful in. I've used the live scope every single fishing trip since I've gotten it, and I've found that it's helped me put 1 or 2 extra fish offshore using the live scope every single fishing trip. There are things like, for example, when I was on Curry the other day, there was a spot that I was fishing where it was 2 foot of water on top. I couldn't see the fish on the live scope, but I could see how the shad were moving in and around this area. And when the shad moved closer to that area, I knew that that's when the fish were going to come bite, and I could throw that bait over there. I know that John Sookup, and guys are saying we should get him on the live stream. We can do that to kind of talk to Randy, and I can moderate between them. John won a BFL on Kerr Lake, the same lake I fished the other week, flipping with the live scope in shallow water. He's literally taking his live scope and flipping into shallow water. So live scope can be very helpful in a lot of situations, but it doesn't matter if you have the live scope or not if you can't find the fish. That's the biggest thing. It's not even that the live scope isn't helpful in a lot of situations. It is, and it can help you put extra fish in the boat, and there is an advantage to it, I believe. But it doesn't compensate for fishing skill. It's not like you can just put a live scope on some random guy who fishes the BFLs, put a live scope on his boat, and then have him compete against any of the top 50 Bassmaster Elite Series guys. Those guys are going to win 8 out of 10 times. We'll give the other guy 2 chances just because of fishing is not always, there's some luck in fishing. But like the guys who know how to catch fish better are going to catch fish better, regardless of the guy's live scope and the other guys that don't have live scope. That's my opinion, at least.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Jonny. But it's sort of like the thing here. It's like if you take, I don't know who's sponsored by Daiwa on the circuit, but if you take some of these, $500-600 Daiwa bait casting reels and put it up with a $600 or $700 rod, and then take the same guy and give him like a $30 Walmart bait casting special, he's still going to catch the fish on that. I mean, it's just like what you said with the live scope versus a lower one. Yeah, that's going to happen. But back to your conversation about John with Bass Tank, I mean, any disagreement that I would have with him would be more of a philosophical disagreement on it. It wouldn't necessarily be, the practicality of it or the science behind it. So
for sure. And it's like there people are saying in Jacob's video, he said he could do just as well with just 2 rafts on his boat. And I 100% believe that. Jacob is good enough at catching fish with just 2 rafts. And guys are saying that, no, I'm saying I need live scope. No, I do not need live scope. I'm saying that live scope helps me put 1 to 2 extra fish in the boat every trip. I've made a whole video explaining why this is. I use math. I have algebra equations. I'll link the video for you guys if you want. It's literally a video explaining my whole reasoning about why live scope can help you catch more fish, but it's not going to take an average fisherman and make them into Jacob Wheeler. Jacob Wheeler, without live scope, is still going to beat everybody else in the country, even if they have a live scope on their boat. He doesn't need it to be successful. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, you guys, I'm sure a lot of you guys out there watch Deadliest Catch, the crab show like that. I mean, the Deadliest Catch and those commercial fishermen is sort of what I relate the live scope to. It's like once you get the high tech stuff like those captains on those crab boats have, or like some of these Japanese fishermen that have these gigantic commercial fishing vessels that are fishing the oceans out, once you get to a certain point with technology, it becomes a commercial venture and it's no longer a sport. It's no longer a recreational sporting event. And that's my big argument with it as far as, in the bigger picture. I see it turning so much of our fishing into more of a commercial venture. I see this especially like on some of the lake groups I'm at. I'm on a lot of different lake groups like Stockton Lake, Table Rock Group, and everybody's using live scope to catch walleye and crappie on those things, and they're getting filleted out right and left. So before, if some guy went out and caught a 15 fish limit of crappie, they had a really good day, and that was an exception to the rule. Now with live scope, these guys are going out and catching limits of crappie and walleye every time they go out with the live scope. So it's becoming more of a commercial venture, and I just don't like that direction.
For sure, it's very true. Like that's the one thing that pointed out here. Bruce said great. He said one extra fish, 2 to 3 pounder per tournament, changes the point standings in the course of a season. That's something big. And like you said, with this commercial fishing venture of being able to see the fish and all this stuff, I think that the big thing with the live scope is it does give advantage to those who want to learn how to use it. And people who get better at it will have an advantage. If you take it away, obviously everyone goes back to a level playing field. I think it's still one of those things where if people embrace it, it will help you become better. So I'm not really sure if I'm on the fence with Randy of like banning it or not. I'm fine with it as long as everyone has access to it, because then it's still a tool that you have to learn it, you have to understand it, but as a tournament professional, if you want to have the best advantage, you can, and you want to fish offshore, and that's something you do, you better invest in the live scope if you're going to go into that pursuit of being a, Bassmaster Lake Series pro, stuff like that, and you want to fish offshore. Fishing up shallow, maybe not as important. You don't need, if you're John Cox, maybe don't need it as much. But if you're a guy like a Jacob Wheeler or anyone who wants to fish offshore, it's very helpful. Again, I linked a video. I actually have a video that I linked in the live chat where I used algebra, like mathematical equations, results from past Major League Fishing tournaments, all kinds of stuff to determine how many extra fish live scope will help you catch over the course of a fishing day, month, whatever it is. And I put that in the video and I did all the math. If you want to watch it, I spent like 30 hours making that video, and it's my kind of like thesis on live scope and what it does for fishing. So just watch that video if you want. It's kind of math filled, but it's very good.
I think when you're talking about competing with it on the top level, I think that every generation you've got your freaks out there, your freak anglers that you can't compare to anybody else. Jacob Wheeler's a freak angler. Brian Thrift's a freak angler. Van Dam was a freak angler back in the 2000s. Before that, you had Klon and Breyer and that type of stuff. Those guys, you sort of have to toss them out the window because they are so far on the next level that they're not even on the same playing field as the rest of the field. I think what you're talking about, or what I'm talking about more, is just the average angler, the average touring pro, the average regional pro, something like that. So it's and you can succeed. I mean, you can succeed and have a lot of success in tournament fishing without live scope, but you're never going to reach the level of a Wheeler or a Thrift or somebody like that, unless you utilize it, without a doubt.
For sure. And I would even tell guys who are learning to fish, if I was going to help someone learn, I actually explained this in my video. I broke up the groups of anglers into novice, intermediate, and advanced. My recommendation to guys is always first learn how to use your 2D sonar, down imaging, and side imaging. You can buy literally, here, let me show you. I got this fish finder right here that I'm going to be putting in my boat very soon. Is a Humminbird Helix 5 Gen 2 model. I'm going to be putting this in my boat because it is a fish finder that has side imaging, down imaging, 2D sonar. It's not mega imaging, it's just regular imaging. This is the same exact fish finder practically I had in my boat with that Onyx unit. I'm going to put this in my boat and just fish with this for like half my fishing trips. Just to show you guys that this unit is $499. This is more than enough to go and catch tons of fish offshore. And if you can't use this unit to its full capability, it doesn't matter if you have live scope or not. You need to learn how to use this first, this $500 unit, before you can do anything offshore. And obviously, yes, having live scope can help you catch one extra fish or something, but learning that fish finder will help you catch 4 or 5 extra fish. The video I made has math to back that up. That's just not me spitballing numbers. I literally have math to prove it. So I keep saying check out that video, but you guys really need to. It's really important. So, anyways, I know we're going off on rants, Randy. I'm ranting, you're ranting. I don't normally rant about this stuff, but tonight I'm just feeling it. I'm feeling I gotta get this out there.
I'm gonna be rubbing off on you a little bit.
For sure. Well, a couple things guys seen over here that one, they're saying they love the Bridgeford beef jerky. They say, I'm glad I'm not sponsored by fish finder companies and I'm sponsored by beef jerky instead. Hey, one thing we can say for sure is whether you like electronics or not, whether you like fishing shallow or offshore, everyone likes beef jerky. So huge shout out to Bridgeford for sponsoring the podcast, the live stream. We can all get behind beef jerky. That's one thing I can say for sure. Definitely want to try to get John Sook up on the live stream. I know I can make that happen. And also, they say they want me to get Matt Steffen on here too. So Randy, we might bring Matt in to do some northern smallmouth talk or something like that. So maybe try to bring out some different guests. Again, guys, if you want to recommend things for us to talk about in future shows, maybe guests you want us to have on, I have a lot of contacts, Randy has a lot of contacts, so we can make it happen. So let us know what you guys want from this live stream. And if you leave that comment or leave your suggestion of what the new video topics can be down in the comments of this video, you'll be entered in to win a case of that Bridgeford beef jerky. 12 packs of this sent straight to your house. So definitely leave a comment down below with what you guys want us to talk about in next week's live stream. Also leave a like on the video if you're here. There's 254 people here, so just go leave a like. It'll really help out this video. And yeah, that's about it. Randy, anything else? I don't know if I cut you off or anything. I was just like in this like a deer in the headlights or whatever it is. I have my blinders on. I'm like rant, live scope.
Hey, it's very therapeutic. I need to rant at least once a week about live scope. So maybe we'll just reserve a little bit every podcast Tuesday night for like give me 5 minutes to rant on it, and I'll be good for the week.
For sure. Bill says we need to do a fish off with flashers. I would be down for that. That would be fun.
Yeah.
Good topic is how to find fish offshore with just one graph. Hey, that's how I learned how to fish offshore, Randy. My first thing ever, I was fishing with a graph just like that Helix 5. It was a Humminbird 798. It's still in my boat. 2D sonar only and a GPS. I had it on a graph mount that could spin around so I could look at it while I was in the front of the boat and the back of the boat. I was using marker buoys, triangulation. I learned for the first 5 years of my offshore fishing, that's how I learned to fish offshore. I think that's a great way to learn. It was literally triangulation, very overrated or very underrated. I love triangulation. I still use it today, even with the live scope. So, awesome. Good deal. Well, guys, looks like everyone is at least enjoying the stream. Got a bunch of people on. I don't know if that was just a topic or what it was, but hopefully you guys enjoyed. We talked about the schools of fish. We talked about old school fishing lures that are going to make a resurgence. We ranted about live scope. I feel like that was a successful and diversified live stream. What do you think, Randy?
Yeah, there you go. Got a little bit of everything in there. We sort of got off topic a little bit, but that's okay. That's what a podcast is for. You never know what you're going to get, man.
Exactly. I think we need a little bit more of this. Sometimes we're pretty structured out here, but sometimes, like you said, we just need to vent every once in a while. I did my venting. Randy, you did too. Hopefully we didn't offend anybody or get anyone angry. If we did, well, we apologize, but, sometimes it just happens, That's how it goes. Anyways, but guys, really appreciate everyone tuning in tonight. Randy, anything else you got for us before we sign off?
No, just thanks, guys, for tuning in. Much appreciated, and hope to see you guys next Tuesday.
Sounds good. Next Tuesday, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, we'll be here. Leave that comment about what you guys want us to talk about for the Bridgeford Beef Jerky giveaway. And other than that, guys, hope you enjoyed the stream. We'll see y'all next week.